What's up, everybody? Welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. A ton of questions to get into, so let's jump into it. First question comes from P Money Music. P Money Music says this: with each of Dillon's starts being strange circumstances in London, in Pittsburgh, and in terrible weather, with the big lead. Yeah, the weather thing is interesting, right, with Dillon, because the bad weather was really only in the first half of the game. But then in the second half, the Browns had a 14-point lead. So they weren't really going to push the ball downfield, right? And it just kept getting, I think by the time Dillon touched the ball, it was a 21-point lead, right? Because I think the Dolphins turned it over almost immediately at the beginning of the first half. So by the time the weather had subsided in the game, which it really reached its fever pitch in like the second quarter of that game, by the time it had subsided, I think the Browns had a 3-score lead. Something crazy like that, right? Because wasn't it pick six? It was the Tyson Campbell pick six that started off the half. So yeah, man. Or it wasn't a 21-point lead. They had a 14-point lead, and then they got a field goal, 11-point lead, and then they got the pick six and the extra point. So that turned into an 18-point lead. 18-point lead by the time Dillon Gabriel touches the ball again. The weather subsided, but now the situation in the game simply doesn't require you to go downfield. It requires you to play a pretty conservative offense for the rest of the game, and the lead only got bigger from there. So yeah, strange circumstances indeed. When can we start making conclusions about what Dillon is? Obviously, it takes time, but is there anything that we can see that will bring a telling of who he is? Now, if you want the complete story of what Dillon will ever be capable of in his NFL career, you're simply not going to get it in this season. Right? To get the story of what a guy's going to be, that takes years to figure out, like, exactly who this guy is. We're talking about 5, 6, 7 years of quarterback play to really get a read on it, right? Because experience makes guys better, all that stuff. You're not going to get a complete read on Dillon. What you're hoping to get is a quick diagnosis of him in general, of like what would be reasonable to expect out of Dillon for the rest of his career, given what you have seen in a reasonable 6 or 7, 8 game sample, right? That's really where you're hoping to get to with him, where you can see what the obvious upside is for him and the obvious downsides are for him. Right now, it's just too early to tell anything as far as what he's capable of mentally, because he's still in the process of acquiring information and learning from that information as a first-time starter in the NFL. And I know sometimes people point to the fact that he's a little bit older, even though he's like 1 year older than Shedeur Sanders. I know that some people point to the fact that he's been in college for so long and has played the most games of any quarterback in college football to say, well, he shouldn't need that much time because he's already so experienced coming out of college. And I don't believe that. I don't think college experience gets you prepared for the NFL. I don't think you could play 1 million college games and it's not the same as playing in the NFL. I don't care if you're playing the Big Ten or in the SEC. College experience is simply not a substitute for NFL experience. It's a completely different ball game. It's a completely different thing. And, it's going to take an adjustment. Whether you played a bunch of games in college or you didn't, you're going to have adjustment periods. You're going to have to learn. There's some things, like a base level of information you might have that might help you out early on. But the idea of like, oh, NFL experience is irrelevant because you played a lot in college. Well, that's just like, I want to be polite here. I don't want to call something stupid. I call too many things stupid, and I don't think that's right. I think that's very dismissive. So let me try to correct myself here and say, I just think that's very short-sighted. There it is. That's a better way to put it. It's short-sighted, and it's just you gotta give everybody a chance to adjust to the NFL game before you can really see, okay, how they can respond to it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get a perfectly accurate read off that guy. Like, the less games you see a guy, the less accurate your read is. But, you come into it with your assumptions, knowing what his physical capabilities are, and then you see what he can bring to the table, maybe intangibly when he's out there, and if the skill sets that you think he has in the meeting room translate to the game, and that's going to take some time to see. So, yeah, I think reasonably you got to at least give it 6 starts before you can make any kind of conclusion. But, even if you saw Dillon for the rest of the season, I think there's still a lot of undiscovered areas with any quarterback prospect that you only see for what? It would be about 12 starts. You know what I mean? Like, there's just going to be question marks there. But, that's also the other thing to consider is the Browns get to see Dillon every day in the meeting room. They see Shedeur every day. And that should help fill in some of these blanks too, whatever that process is in the building. So that's important as well. Luke says this, hey Q, do you think Dillon's height prevents him from hitting big plays downfield, or do we just not get enough separations from our wide receiver for it to hit some big plays? I don't think it's really, I think the biggest problem, and I think the reality of this issue, is that there are like a bunch of things that are compounding that are resulting in this. The first problem is you are not protecting Dillon Gabriel long enough, or any of the quarterbacks in this offense long enough, for them to see things develop downfield. So if you want your quarterback to not just throw the ball blindly downfield, you want your quarterback to actually like read and see if it's good to go to throw downfield. We're not protecting at a high enough level to allow for that on a consistent basis, where a quarterback can have trust that he's going to have time and throw the ball with relative comfort. So that has been a massive problem, whether it's Joe Flacco, who is certainly capable of throwing the ball downfield, or Dillon Gabriel, who we have question marks in that area. It really hasn't. Look, the issue with throwing the ball downfield has nothing to do with whether you think a guy can physically do it or not, right? Because Joe Flacco, we knew could do it. He still can't do it. He couldn't do it in this offense because we didn't protect long enough. So there's one part of the problem. I think the other part of the problem is, our wide receivers aren't that great. So when we do get protection, do we trust that our wide receiver is going to be open? And you can start to see the problems start to compound here, right? So we don't have the most trust in our offensive line. So that means that we're not very likely to look downfield and hope that that deep route can open up. And then even in times where you do have the protection you need, you're not really going to trust that the deep route is going to be open because you don't trust that your wide receivers can get separation. And you just end up in a situation where it's just logical for these quarterbacks to just dismiss the deep ball, which ends up being a huge problem for your offense. This is how things compound and make things worse. It's already bad that your offensive line's not blocking well. It's not helpful at all that your wide receivers aren't getting open downfield, because now there's no incentive for these quarterbacks to just fight through it and just look downfield, right? So it's compounding upon itself. It's not just the wide receivers. It's not just the offensive line. And, right now we don't even know if it's really personnel at the quarterback position, because again, I've seen Dillon throw the ball downfield, at least at like Oklahoma. He didn't do it a ton at Oregon, but he did do it a ton at Oklahoma. And again, college experience is much different than NFL experience, but he's capable of throwing it downfield. The issue isn't the capability. It is, can you protect? Can you get open? Can both those things happen at the same time? And can both those things, more importantly, happen enough to where the quarterback, when it's called, trusts it and doesn't abandon ship and just go to the check down? Because what's happening is there's not a lot of trust there, right? The play gets called, they peek at it, and if it's not immediately wide open, they're not going to throw it. They're going to go to the check down because they don't trust that the line's going to protect, and they don't trust that wide receiver is going to get open. That's really the problem, That's why it's so much easier for Joe Flacco now, because, his line might not be good, but he can trust reasonably that Jamar Chase is going to get open, right? Like you gotta have one or the other. You could have a trash O-line and you can have wide receivers that can separate. You have wide receivers that can separate. You have a bad O-line, a great O-line, my bad, and wide receivers that can't separate. You can't have them both because it compounds into checkdowns. Like that's always what it's gonna be. Next question is from Luke. Do you think Dillon's height prevents him from hitting big plays downfield? Or I kind of explained this with the last question. I think it's a compound issue. And I'm not really convinced that the issue is the quarterbacks themselves because again, Joe Flacco wasn't throwing the ball downfield with this personnel. And he clearly is capable of it, right? So is it really a quarterback thing? It doesn't seem like it. Seems like we've seen two quarterbacks play so far this year with this offensive line, with these wide receivers, and both those quarterbacks did not throw the ball downfield. Seems like there's something else going on that's creating this problem. And the something else that's going on is the offensive line and the wide receiver personnel, right? I'm pretty sure the coaching staff would love to get some chunk plays. So I don't think the coaching staff is like, no, we don't want any chunk plays. So if they're not getting those chunk plays, it's because they probably can't get those chunk plays. And it's probably at the source of it, the offensive line and the wide receivers not getting separation or catching the ball. There's just not a lot of trust between the quarterback and the offensive line right now and the quarterback and the wide receiver, no matter who's the quarterback. And it's not going to change until one of those units or both of those units start to play better football. Squidward's, all right, man. If you could make a realistic mock trade for a wide receiver to help out our offense, who would it be and what would the offer look like? We need a big 50-50 guy out there. Well, the guy I want is not a big receiver, but he is a 50-50 ball guy, Marvin Mims. I think you can get him for like a 4th or 5th round pick, maybe even like a pick swap. I think you could maybe swap some picks here and get Marvin Mims. I would be a big fan of it. He's super underutilized in Denver. I think he's a 50-50 ball guy. I think he's somebody who needs to be used like a true wide receiver. And I think he's the second best wide receiver that the Broncos have, but they use him like he's the 4th or 5th best guy. So I like him a lot. I would go after him. Ryan says this. Is there a world where Stefanski doesn't get fired strictly because the front office and Haslam don't see a better option, at least one willing to come to Cleveland? We'll answer that question in just a second, but first let me thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required, and also if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. All right, to answer Ryan's question, is there a world where Stefanski doesn't get fired because the front office and Haslam don't see a better option available? Maybe this could be a rationale for not moving on from Kevin. But my question back to y'all is like, is that a rationale you want? Like, I don't think that should determine it. I think what should determine whether you keep Kevin Stefanski or not is a simple question. There's a problem on offense. The offense has not been what you want it to be. Do you think Kevin can fix it? If you think Kevin can fix it, then keep Kevin Stefanski. If you are not convinced Kevin can fix it, then you got to find somebody you think can. And look, name value wise, there might not be a ton of names there that are going to have the same name value as Kevin Stefanski right now. Kevin's a 2-time coach of the year. If he gets hired somewhere else, that fan base is going to be ecstatic about it, right? But if you're going to move on from him because you want to solve a problem, well, you can't just say, hey, we don't need to solve this problem anymore because we can't find anybody that has the name value greater than Kevin. You got to go out there and look for people who can solve the problem. Like, the problem is the job isn't getting done. Do you think Kevin can get the job done? That's really all that can determine it. You know, whether you got to go hire somebody to take the job that's, you know, fresh face and maybe doesn't have the name recognition, but you think they could solve it, then go ahead and do that if you think that's going to solve the problem. But the issue is right now the offense has been stale. It has not innovated over the last couple of years. And, you know, that points to Kevin Stefanski. So do you think he can solve the problem or not? That's really it. That's all they can look at it. They can't go in there and be like, oh, well, we can't get, this big name coach to take the job instead of it. They got to go out and try to solve a problem this offseason and ask themselves if Kevin Stefanski is a part of the problem or is he part of the solution? You know what I mean? There can't be this gray area where you're just like, oh, well, yeah, I think he's a part of the problem, but I don't want to fire him because, I don't want to get worse. And it's like, well, if you think he's a part of the problem, you got to get rid of him. You want to fix the offense this offseason, right? Like, that's the big thing. So that's going to be the question that I think should determine it. Whether you can get somebody to replace Kevin, that's why search committees exist. That's why coach scouting exists. That's why all of that stuff exists, is because you're not going to get a guy with super high name value maybe, but you're going to find the next guy, the guy you think can solve the problem, if you don't think Kevin can. The real Brother Brown says, do you believe the Browns organization has learned to be more patient after realizing that the trigger was likely pulled on Baker a bit too soon? I don't know if that's the lesson I would want them to learn from that whole situation, because it's easy to get hindsight 2020 and say to yourself, oh yeah, all we needed to do was wait it out with Baker Mayfield. But it took a lot of things happening to Baker Mayfield for him to get to the point to where he is in Tampa Bay, right? It took Baker getting cut from the Carolina Panthers. It took him going to the Los Angeles Rams and then hitting free agency with really not a lot of prospects. And then battling it out with Kyle Trask to take the job. Like, it took a lot of humbling to get Baker to the point to where he is today. And I think Baker is very open about that, and he talks about that all the time. So if you're the Browns organization, yeah, maybe there's a lesson to learn about patience here, but like, should you let that patience let you hang on to like Deshaun Watson for an extra few years? No, I think by the time you got to the place you got with Baker Mayfield, it was time that Baker needed to go in Cleveland. Like, it was clear that it didn't feel like Baker was going to get to that point in Cleveland for whatever reason. I think if you're the Browns, what you should learn from is what created that situation, right? Why is it that you couldn't hang through a rough patch with Baker Mayfield? Why was it so untenable at the end of Baker Mayfield's run in Cleveland that the Browns couldn't kind of get through that patch? And that's where the lesson should be learned, because I think what created that monster that existed in 2021, where the organization and Baker Mayfield were clashing at a very high level, is the 2019 coaching search, and really the amount of instability that they exposed Baker Mayfield to early in his career, I think was the biggest thing that really ruined the Baker Mayfield era for the Cleveland Browns, because you put him in a situation to where everybody he's supposed to report to, Baker Mayfield, keeps getting fired, right? His offensive coordinator, his quarterback's coach, his head coach. So at some point, he's going to develop a lack of respect for whoever is in those positions, because he has seen those positions early in his career come and go. He's the number one overall pick. So he's going to talk to whatever coach or whoever's in the building as if he's going to be here forever, and they're not. Right? And which was true for Baker Mayfield. Then you put him in a situation when you hire Freddie Kitchens, where he had to take over the entire franchise for a bit of time there. And that was always going to create a situation where there was going to be friction between Baker Mayfield and whoever you brought in to replace Freddie Kitchens. Because he's going from, this is your show, to, you are now just the quarterback again. This is the structure. But you taught him throughout the first few years of his career that he didn't need to respect that structure, because that structure was very temporary. The instability that they created around Baker Mayfield is why Baker Mayfield's on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Whether you can connect those dots or not, that's what I think, right? That's the lesson they need to learn. If they draft another quarterback in the top 5, they got to be damn sure that they're going to create some stability around that quarterback, so that whatever structure it is that you have, that quarterback can learn to respect. You cannot have a situation again where you got 5 offensive coordinators in 4 years for a guy, like you did with Baker Mayfield. And You got a bunch of head coaching changes like you did with Baker Mayfield. What Baker Mayfield saw in his first 2 years of his career, like 3 or 4 head coaching changes. It was crazy. So that cannot happen, right? That is where the problem started. At the end of the day, you could say it's patience because we should have been patient with Baker and maybe that works out. But the Browns created a monster in that organization that in order to be fixed, not fixed, that's a weird word, but in order to be quelled, that monster, it required Baker's ego to be humbled at a high level. It required him to get traded and to get cut and all this stuff. And then he finally got to a place to where he needed to be. But he would have never been at that place where he was in 2021 if the Browns hadn't exposed him to so much instability, right? If maybe the Browns did not hang on to Hugh Jackson a year longer than they needed to, and did not try to bring in Todd Haley and whatever they were doing then, right? Like all this weird stuff that they did at the beginning of the Baker era, and then bringing in Freddie Kitchens. Maybe if they just from the jump had a guy in there that could stabilize, like had a Sean McDermott in there, who they originally wanted to hire instead of Hugh Jackson, and that guy has stability, then maybe Baker Mayfield's a top-tier quarterback for the Cleveland Browns right now, or at least a top 15 quarterback for the Cleveland Browns right now. But we didn't create that. That created a monster, and that monster could only be fixed by going somewhere else, which is a story as old as rain in Cleveland. But that's where you got to fix it. The stability of the organization has to be addressed at some point, and they got to do something to make sure that they're not putting young players in these positions constantly, because it's just going to create results like we saw with Baker Mayfield. That's my takeaway from it. Let me know what y'all think, because there's a lot of different theories rolling around with that. Daryl says, are we rushing to judgment on Dillon Gabriel, or are we sure that his limitations are because we're assuming he's too little, weak arm? To me, it's been 3 games. I'd like to see him open things up a little bit more. Folks say he doesn't look like a quarterback and totally dismiss him as a pretty bit mature, especially considering his circumstances he had in 3 games. Also, is he throwing hospital balls that wide receivers are afraid to catch? Okay, I'm going to put a moratorium on the word hospital balls, because we're just talking about throws over the middle. We're just talking about throws over the middle. And for whatever reason, we have pretended over the last few years as if throwing a ball over the middle where somebody gets hit has never been part of the agreement between quarterback and wide receiver. That's always been the agreement, right? Why was Michael Irvin so respected? Because Michael Irvin was willing to go over the middle. Why was Michael Irvin respected for going over the middle? Because when you go over the middle, there's an understanding amongst football players that you're going to get smacked. But you're going to get the yards. But you're going to get smacked. Right? That's why going over the middle isn't for everybody. Now, it's a lot easier to go over the middle now, but that's always been the consequence of attacking the middle of the field. In fact, we're calling these hospital balls now, as if quarterbacks should just avoid the middle of the field entirely. It's just Twitter nonsense. Like, just this is where it's like, okay, people got to stop getting their football analysis from Twitter exclusively. Throwing the ball over the middle is fine. Now, what you don't want to do is constantly throw the ball high over the middle where you're exposing somebody's ribs to like getting broken or something like that. But taking a hit over the middle of the field is not the big fucking deal that people make it out to be, right? Like, if you throw the ball low over the middle of the field and somebody takes a hit, that's fine. If you throw the ball at hand's length over the middle of the field and somebody gets hit, that's expected. The hospital ball is slow and high over the middle of the field. You see why? Like, look, I catch a ball here, boom, you hit me, shell, right? I catch a ball low, I go low to catch it, boom, shell. I go up here, no shell, bad time. That's hospital ball. That's a hospital ball. We have used hospital ball to describe every throw over the middle where somebody gets hit. That's not accurate, okay? A hospital ball is when you leave a pass high and slow that forces a receiver to go up here and then exposes their ribs to contact. That's a hospital ball. A hospital ball isn't every pass where somebody gets tackled. I don't know who's teaching people this, but they need to stop, okay? Because I have seen the word hospital ball used so inappropriately over the last couple of years. So just for review, if you're going to be a part of this audience, I want you to know this is my definition of a hospital ball. High, exposed ribs, slow ball, a lot of time for a defensive player to get underneath and smack you, right? If you could create a shell with your body and protect yourself from the hit, that's not a hospital ball. That's just a ball, right? But if you are being asked constantly to catch a ball that is slow, late, and high, that's a hospital ball. Don't know who's teaching people this, but that's a hospital ball. You see why one's called a hospital ball and the other one's just a regular catch? Because yeah, you're going to get hit with both, but only this hit is going to send you to the fucking hospital. This hit, that you ain't going to the hospital. You going to second down or first and 10 after that. So no. I have not seen him throw an overwhelming amount of hospital balls. Has he missed high? Yes. But has he been late and high? Not often. And is he throwing slow footballs and he's throwing high? No. When he's throwing over the middle of the field, are guys getting tackled? Of course, it's the middle of the field, right? But are guys being put in a position to have their ribs be broken? No. Like nobody's had their ribs broken yet. So that's not a hospital ball. Again, I feel like this is one of those phrases that people just say because a quarterback they don't like completed a pass and like, well, that's not actually good that he got 35 yards there. That was a hospital ball. And it's like, all right. Turnover worthy plays is next, by the way. I've seen people just say, well, that could have been an interception and just like negate impressive plays. And yeah, turnover worthy plays is the next phrase that people are going to misuse. But hospital ball, I'm sorry, I had to go on that rant. I'm so fucking tired of people not knowing what an actual hospital ball is. All right, let's go to the next thing here. And the next question is from Flash the Sloth, who says, how has Grant Delpit's role within the Jim Schwartz defense grown to make him indispensable? He's really like this extra linebacker that the Browns can use to stay in lighter packages, but still be good against the run, right? Like he really does allow Devin Bush and all these guys that they bring in at linebacker to be great. So yeah, I think he's essential to what the Browns are doing, and I hope that the Browns can bring him back. The last question of the day is JoJo. Obviously this is very early, but looking forward to 2026, we can't go rookie Gabriel Shador, right? It seems like that is way too young of a quarterback room. If we draft 2026 QB with the top QB, would this mean that Gabriel or Sanders would probably be on the trade block? I think potentially Sanders could be moved. Maybe Gabriel could be moved. Gabriel makes a lot of sense as a backup quarterback or somebody who could be a transition starter for you, but we haven't seen Shador play yet. So maybe Shador might play at a level to where he makes more sense to be in that role. I think ultimately that's what the rest of this season and the start of the next offseason is going to be a competition for, who gets to keep that role. And like every year, the Browns will trade the loser of that competition for like a 5th or 6th round pick and move on, right? I think that's more or less what we're looking at. Kind of the same stuff that the Browns have been doing with similar spots in the past. Maybe the Browns bring in like a super veteran a super veteran quarterback to kind of be that like quarterback coach, but they already have a quarterback coach, so I don't think they find it necessary. And then they'll have the rookie in if they draft a rookie. So yeah, I think it'll be a similar setup. Maybe they get rid of one of the rookies just because they want the attention to be on that rookie. They don't want people to be calling for like the 3rd string, 5th round pick. So maybe they get rid of Shador for that, or like maybe they get rid of Gabriel because Shador outshines him. Either way, I would find it hard to believe we walk into next season with both of these guys on the roster. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night.